And there's another, and that was from Carol Reed of Newport. There's two others from Alan English of Coogee and Brenda Kovacic of Eltham that were both also very supportive. For example, it's not the wealth, gender or sexuality of the parents that matters, it's the love and support provided by those parents and the extended family. Now let me read you one letter from a person who decided not to disclose their name or address. It was absolutely disgusting to read the story of Elton John and his husband and their artificial parentage of a baby boy. Has nobody considered the deprivation to this poor child of a mother's love, or his right to one father and a normal upbringing? He should not be treated as some chattel for a pair of depraved and self-indulging individuals who have everything and anything they want whenever they want it. So that gives you a sense of how polarising the views are on same-sex marriage and same-sex families. So let's have a look now at human rights law relating to same-sex family, or relating to families. So you've all had a chance to read Article 10. And since the drafting of ISESCA in 1966, the rearing of children by same-sex couples has become commonplace. And I can't remember the exact statistics, but the census in Australia about 15 years ago started including a category of same-sex couples, and so they started collecting data about the number of children in same-sex families. But there is, of course, a high degree of underreporting because there is still intolerance by members of society, like name withheld over there that I read out, that people aren't always that inclined to report that they're in a same-sex relationship with children. But interestingly, the Human Rights Committee in General Comment 19, which is a general comment, is their sort of about once a year or so, they publish a general comment that there is their authoritative interpretation of a particular provision of the treaty designed to help guide states in how they might implement it. And in General Comment 19, the Human Rights Committee acknowledged the changing nature of the family when it stated that the concept of the family may differ in some respects from state to state, and it is therefore not possible to give the concept a standard definition. But what is clear is that the views of name withheld are really quite flawed, because a lot of research has now been done into children raised in same-sex families, because it has now, they've got about 2 decades of children born to lesbian mothers or gay dads, and what has become clear is that the research on children raised by lesbian and gay parents demonstrate that these children do as well, if not better, than children raised by heterosexual parents. Specifically, the research demonstrates that children of same-sex couples are as emotionally healthy and socially adjusted and at least as educationally and socially successful as children raised by heterosexual parents. So there's a lot of data out there now, a lot of research in the United States, in Australia, in the UK, that says there is no damage to children being raised by two parents who love them, albeit of the same sex. So when we're talking about children, then we can't not talk about the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And let me just quickly point you to a couple of relevant articles. Article 2.2 says a child can't be discriminated against on the basis of the beliefs or opinions or activities of the child's parents. And research is starting to show that when you prohibit a child's parents from marrying, then that sends a message to the rest of society that it's okay to discriminate against the people. We, the state, aren't going to recognise them. We're not going to recognise their relationship, so it's okay for you to do the same. Whereas if the state says, hey, these parents can marry, they can raise a family the same as everyone else, it makes it harder for people like name withheld to justify their discrimination. I'd also point out Article 3.1, which is about the best interest of the child, but recognise that it's fairly weak language. It talks about the best interest of the child being a primary consideration, whereas if you look at the Family Law Act, it talks about the best interest of the child being the paramount consideration. So it's a case where actually our domestic laws are stronger than the international laws. Bringing that back to same-sex families, as I just said, you need to recognise and acknowledge the relationship of the child's parents and of each parent to the child, because invariably only one of the parents will have a biological connection to the child. It's necessary to recognise the parents' relationship with each other and both parents' relationship with the child. Okay, I've had the 5-minute warning, so let me move on to say, I said when Jocelyn was decided there was one country in the world, there's now 10. So in a decade, we've been averaging one country a year legalising same-sex marriage. And they've come to it by different pathways. Some of them has been by litigation, where most famously in the United States have argued that it's unconstitutional to not allow same-sex couples to marry. Others have just been politicians standing up and saying, this is wrong, I'm going to do something about it. And the countries are all quite different. Some of them are very religious countries, Catholic countries like Spain, Argentina, and then you've got other countries like South Africa where they've come out of the apartheid regime and they've just said, we are not going to discriminate against anyone for any reason, not just race, for any reason, and they have their constitution that actually protects against discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation. So very quickly, why aren't civil unions enough? Why do gays insist on marriage? And the answer is really that we've been there, done that before. When you set up a parallel institution, say this is equal in all regards, but it's different, it's discriminatory. Separate but equal. Blacks in the back of the bus. Separate school systems. It is not equality. And I'd also point out in the UK, so they've legislated for civil unions. Only gays are entitled to enter into a civil union. Heterosexual couples can't enter into a civil union. And all government forms now have these categories. Are you single, divorced, widow, de facto, married, civil union? Now, you're essentially, in that situation, forcing someone to out themselves or to lie. If I tick the box civil union, I'm telling the passport office, I'm telling the schools, the hospital, everyone who has such a form that I'm gay. And maybe I don't want to do that. So having a separate institution for a certain sector of society is actually, again, inviting and labelling those people and inviting discrimination. So the two views can really be summed up there. On the one side, you've got Justice Lafome of the Canadian court saying any alternative to marriage simply offers the insult of formal equivalency without the promise of substantive equality. And then the other view, invariably informed by religious views, I don't know if you can read that small sign, God created marriage as a union of man and woman for love and procreation, and any other definition is an abomination. But of course, in this country, as in many others, we have separation of church and state. And in the countries that have legalised same-sex marriage, they've always maintained that religious officers do not have to perform same-sex marriage if it's against their belief. A bit like we heard about doctors not wanting to perform abortion. You don't have to, it doesn't suit you, but you can't stop other people going down that path. So in conclusion, I think there is a human right for same-sex couples to marry, but it's not broadly recognised. And it's we need to interpret laws in the time that we're in now. And again, it was a bit like Caroline said with abortion. You had this legislation back in the 1900s that talked about abortion as noxious, poisonous substances, and in 2009 we're interpreting that RU 486 does not fit that definition. We have to have modern interpretations, not keep the laws as interpreted as they were in 1948 or 1966. So what does that mean for Australia? Most of the reforms in same-sex marriage are happening at the domestic level rather than at the international level. As we've seen, the Jocelyn decision wasn't very favourable. And whilst there's some positive jurisprudence coming out of the UN Human Rights Committee in terms of Toonen and the Young decisions, they're not mirrored in the overall work of the UN. So prospects in Australia? Well, we're not going to be able to go down the litigation path like in Canada or the UK because we simply don't have a National Human Rights Act that would facilitate that. So any change is going to happen because our politicians decide that that's the way to go, and they seem to be a bit nervous about that, despite the overwhelming majority of Australians indicating in recent polls that they are in favour of same-sex marriage. Politicians still seem very nervous about that, and the stated preference of the Prime Minister is for a national scheme of relationship registration. We currently have registration systems in Victoria and Tasmania and New South Wales, but I need another hour to tell you why they're unsatisfactory. But the power of the Greens at the moment, and this being one of their agenda items that they want to see change happen, does give some cause for optimism. And I'll just wrap up with my shameless plug for the book that is coming out. So, Current Trends in the Regulation of Same-Sex Relationships. It's interesting, actually, as a little aside, the title that I proposed was Current Trends in the Regulation of Same-Sex Families. I had a very stodgy old person as my editorial contact at Federation Press who would not allow same-sex families because he said that to him suggests that everyone in the family is of the same sex. So 2 women have 2 daughters. But if you have a son and a daughter, then that's not a same-sex family. I tried to point out to him very diplomatically that was flawed rationale, and I referred him to about 20 other publications that use the term same-sex families, but without success. So it is Current Trends in the Regulation of Same-Sex Relationships. But the President of the Australian Human Rights Commission is launching it on the 5th of May, and if anyone wants to come along, I've got invitations. Thank you.